Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. Today I have on Father Robert Nixon, who is a Benedictine. He's a scholar, a translator, a musician, among other things. Father Nixon, how are you? Thanks for coming on the show.
I'm very well, Drew. Thanks so much for inviting me, giving me this opportunity to share with all your listeners today.
Yeah, no, we're pleased to have you on. I think we'll have a good conversation. So, the reason we're bringing you on is you have this new book about the cross and the medal of St. Benedict. And so I just figured, why not talk about St. Benedict? I think many people have this on the back of their rosaries or a medal like this around their
Yeah,
necks. And a lot of us might not know exactly the story of how this came about. So I guess just to start off, for maybe the few Catholics who don't know, maybe just give us a brief background on who St. Benedict is and his life and legacy.
yeah. Saint Benedict is regarded as the founder of Western monasticism. He lived back in the fifth and sixth century. He was born in the year of our Lord 480, and he was born to a wealthy and noble family in the town of Norcia. At an early age, he decided to live his life as a hermit. He felt called by God to go and live a life of simplicity and solitude and contemplation. And so he took himself away from the city of Rome and went to a place called Subiaco. The original name in Latin is Sublaco, meaning beside a lake. And he found a nice cave there, and he lived there a life of solitude for about 3 years. And for us today, it's probably difficult to imagine anyone going off the grid completely in that way. Of course, in the ancient world, people living as hermits was a not uncommon thing to do. And there were reasons why it was easier to do back in those days. No one had running water, electricity, internet. So going off the grid was not actually as big a deal as it would be today. But also, hermits played a very important role in society. This might seem a bit paradoxical, but in fact, they acted as counselors, as people who would listen to other people's, problems, issues, who would offer prayer. So a lot of the hermits of the ancient world came to be revered because of their wisdom and sanctity. And exactly the same thing happened with Saint Benedict. After a number of years, a group of young men who lived in a kind of monastic community asked St. Benedict if he would agree to be their leader. And he reluctantly agreed to do that. So this was really the very first Benedictine monastery. These were people who lived, they prayed the divine office, prayed 7 times a day. They tried to cultivate a life of simplicity, evangelical poverty, of allowing the space for silence and contemplation. So keeping a life as simple as possible so they could focus on what really mattered to them. Now, these Benedictine monasteries quickly spread. St. Benedict believed that the optimal number for a community was 12 in emulation of our Lord's apostles. So, whenever his community got to a certain size, maybe to 20, he would send off a small party of men to found a new monastery somewhere else. And by means of this, by the time he died, there were 12 monasteries which he had founded,
Oh, wow.
all as offshoots of his original one. Now,
Hmm.
something very important happened a little bit after his death. Um, Saint Gregory the Great, who is probably a close relative of Saint Benedict, kind of like a nephew or something, he was chosen as Pope. Now, before he had become Pope, St. Gregory he was a wealthy man. He had constructed 3 Benedictine monasteries himself in Rome, and he lived as a monk in one of them. He was chosen as Pope kind of reluctantly, so he had to give up his monastic life, but he wrote the biography of St. Benedict, which is our source of information about his life. He also encouraged people to found Benedictine monasteries throughout Europe. For example, he sent a group of Benedictine monks over to England to bring the gospel to them. This is about in the year 600 or so. And as a consequence of this, lots of monasteries sprung up around Europe. Now, this was a time in history when the Roman Empire was in a state of decline. The monasteries began to fulfill very important social and spiritual roles. They became centers of learning because it was important for monks to be able to read and write so they could do the liturgy for a start. But because of this, the monasteries accumulated large libraries. And if a person wanted their child to learn to read and write, which in those days, of course, meant learning to read and write in Latin, they would send them to a monastery for a number of years to be educated. A well-known example of this is St. Thomas Aquinas.
Hmm.
His parents sent him to the Benedictine monastery of Monte Cassino for a number of years to basically for his formative education, his literacy. It's also education in character and morals, of course. The monasteries also functioned as hospitals and orphanages. So in the Middle Ages, of course, there was nothing like social security. If a person had no one to look after them, then they would often be taken to a monastery.
Hmm.
This might be an orphaned child, might be a disabled person, and the monastery would actually take care of them, often in return for whatever work they might be able to do. But that was part of the function of monasteries. So scholars believe that in the Middle Ages in Europe, there were between 1 and 2 million Benedictine monks and nuns at any
Oh,
given time.
wow.
Now, given the smallness of the population, that meant that like 2 or 3% of the population were actually Benedictine monks or nuns, which is pretty unbelievable. Today, I think
Hmm.
we would be like 0.001% of the population.
Sure.
But uh, but anyway, so the monasteries did play an extremely important role in our culture
Hmm.
throughout the entire Middle Ages. It's not for nothing that St Benedict is regarded as the patron saint of Western Europe.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like the model of his monasteries is like a perfect model of the Christian life. I mean, you have everything from learning and scholarship to charity and taking care of the poor and all
Uh,
of that.
very,
I mean, it's
very
a
much
perfect
so.
embodiment of that. That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So our Benedictine monasteries are kind of microcosms of human society in some ways. And sometimes people say, well, as monks, how can you be doing works of charity and hospitality and so forth? The reality is that we're doing works of charity within our own monastic community,
Mhm.
both to our fellow monks and to our visitors.
Mhm.
And so for Benedictine monks, our essential charism is prayer and contemplation. This is the one unchangeable element of Benedictine life. Now, there are Benedictine monasteries throughout the world which have different ministries. Some of them are missionary, some of them run schools or universities, as some of them put on retreats. But the one unchangeable thing is this praying of the divine office. And another important part of our charism is um, is a love of learning. So, as I mentioned, Benedictine monasteries were centres of learning. The great libraries of Europe originally started as monastic libraries, and that's still very much so to this day. One of the things which Benedictine monks used to do was copy books by hand. And this is in the days before the printing press. So if you wanted a copy of the Bible, for example, you would ask a monk to do it. And as you can imagine, copying out a Bible by hand is
Expensive.
quite, yes, yes, it would take a few years, I believe.
Wow.
But my own work today as a translator from Latin, I view as a continuation of that charism of the scriptoria of the Middle
Hmm.
Ages. I'm obviously not copying by hand, but I am making these works available, which
Hmm.
would otherwise, be lost. Because
Hmm.
the sad fact is that even within the church, uh, the fluency in the Latin language is disappearing at a shocking rate. And if we went back in time 100 and 200 years ago, everyone who went to university would have done Latin, to a pretty high level, just as something taken for granted. The fact is that now, even within theological circles,
Hmm.
the number of priests who can actually read texts and understand them, as opposed to just reading the liturgical texts, which they know what they mean already,
Hmm.
is getting very low. So for that reason, I feel that this is an important work of mine to be able to share these works before they're lost in oblivion,
Hmm.
and particularly this cross and medal of St Benedict, because I've noticed over the past few years this is a devotional object which has been becoming so prevalent.
Hmm.
As you mentioned, it's everywhere you look, and I thought, well, not too many people really know all of its meanings, its powers, the way it's to be used, and
Hmm.
its origin. So this was what led me to put this book together, and thanks to Tan Books to be
Hmm.
able to share it with interested Catholics
Hmm.
throughout the world.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the development of this medal because I mean I think for me I encountered the medal and knew about Saint Benedict. Recently, I actually visited Monte Cassino. We were in Rome, and that was a really fun trip. Beautiful, beautiful abbey. It was amazing. And so I mean I knew some of his life and some of his impact. But I have no idea where the medal came from or any of that. And I'm sure, like you said, there's a lot of people who might even have one and know about Saint Benedict, but don't know how the medal developed or the devotional some of the devotional practices behind it. So tell us basically how did the medal come about and what's the significance of it?
Okay, so the story of how the medal came about, um, we no one actually knows precisely when it was first used.
Hmm.
But we do know when it came into popularity, and this was in the year 1647.
Hmm.
So, in historical terms, a long time after Saint Benedict himself, of course.
Hmm.
And at this stage, there was a an outbreak of witchcraft in a lot of places in Europe,
Hmm.
particularly in Germany and also in England, for that matter. But in Germany, it happened that a whole coven of witches and wizards were arrested. They were found out and they were questioned. And they said there's this particular village where there's a Benedictine abbey, the Abbey of Metten. They said that we're unable to do anything there. We can't affect the people there. They're all,
Hmm.
and they said, why is this? And they found out it was because that the people who lived in this area had these St. Benedict's medals, or
Hmm.
they had the design on it painted in various places. This was both in the monastery and around the village as a whole. And news of this quickly spread, and people came to realize that this St. Benedict's medal or cross was a powerful defense against
Hmm.
the forces of evil, which were very prevalent then, as they are now.
Hmm.
But when they first discovered the medal, and this is something which is very interesting, I believe, it had all the letters on it as we have, but no one actually knew what they meant. Not even the monks at the local monastery
Hmm.
knew. They'd been using this medal for hundreds of years, but over the
Hmm.
course of time, they'd basically forgotten.
Oh wow.
Then about 50, yeah, then about 50 years later, um, a monk was discovered in the library of this monastery a very old manuscript which had a picture of Saint Benedict, and within this picture were inscribed the verses, um, the the letters of which are the source of the letters we find on the cross, and that picture actually is contained in this book.
Hmm.
So it's got the various examples of different designs of the medal over the years, as well as the sources of how we found out about it.
Hmm.
And so this meant that then they knew what all the verses actually stood for, and these things, which I'll tell you about in a little while, but they are so important because they're both prayers They are warnings against evil spirits.
Hmm.
To see the medal with its letters and to think about what they all mean,
Hmm.
I think is a wonderful thing, because it is a source of spiritual energy, of moral guidance. And so, shortly after this, and at this stage, we're now into the 1700s, um, the use of the medal became extremely widespread and popular all throughout Europe. Um, and um, Interestingly enough, even in Protestant countries, it became
Hmm.
very popular. So I think a lot of the people in Protestant countries, while they were nominally converted, they still had this devotion to the saints. They still had this sense of the power of these sacred things. Um, and then it was given approval by the Pope, who specified various indulgences for people who have the medal, who wear it, as well as the manner in which the medal is to be blessed. And the blessing of the medal is contained in this book, as well as all the indulgences, spiritual privileges which accompany it. Including the medal, including the blessing in this book, actually was one of the things I was particularly keen to do, because a lot of Benedictines, a lot of priests are asked to bless these medals, and often they don't have the actually officially approved blessing handy.
Hmm.
So this helps in this respect. Um, and the other very important thing which is contained in this book is what all of the letters mean on it. And I think this is actually within the small design of the medal, there is a treasure trove of wisdom and spiritual guidance. So I'll just I'll share with you a little of these, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
great. Yeah, that was the first part I flipped to actually, because I'm like, I remembered it was something really cool. One of my friends, actually the guy who's running the buttons right now, is really into it, and he's memorized part of the meanings.
Oh,
But I flipped right to that
that's very
page
well
because I
done.
was like, wow. So
Yeah,
yeah, tell us
uh,
about it.
good, good. Okay, so what we have the cross in the middle. Around the four regions of the cross are the biggest letters, which are CSPB, um, and that is very easy to remember. So that is Crux Sancte Patris Benedicti, the cross of our Holy Father Benedict. Um, then, if we look at the circumference on the right side, we'll see that's it. On the right side there, you will see a VRSNSMV. And what that stands for is Vade Retro Satana Numquam Suade Nike Vana. Get behind me, Satan, and then never persuade to me vain things.
Hmm.
If we look then at the other side of the circumference, this is the left side, reading from the bottom up towards the top, you'll see SMQLIVB. And this stands for Sunt malaque libas, ipse venida bibas. The things which you love are evil.
Hmm.
You yourself will drink your venom. And
Such
then
an epic
looking
line.
at
That line is so
it,
powerful.
it is, it is. Now, if we have a look at the actual cross part itself, if we look at the horizontal beam, reading from left to right, we have NDSMD, which is non Draco sit Mickey Dux. May the dragon not be to me a leader. And in some early sources, rather than translating the D as Draco, which is dragon, they have Diabolus, may the
Hmm.
devil. So obviously it's the same meaning. Then if we look at the vertical line of the cross, going from the top to the bottom, Crux Sacra sit mihi lux. May the holy cross be unto me light.
Hmm.
And that is all the meanings there. Now, Most of the medals these days have a pax written up the top, which stands for peace. But the diagram in this book, which shows an earlier one, actually has the IHS, which is a representation of the name of Jesus, which originated with St Bernardine of Siena. Um, Now, the interesting thing about the Latin text is that it actually rhymes if you look at the verses. So, crux sacra sit mihi lux, non draco sit mihi dux, vade retro satana, numquam suede mihi vana, sunt mala que libas, ipse venina bibas. So I've given a translation of this also in rhyming English, which might be easier to remember. May the cross shine bright upon me. May the dragon stay far from me. O Satan, get behind me. Unto evil never bind me. Wicked things you love and think. Your own venom may you drink.
That's awesome. I love it. I love that it's so. I mean, it's so powerful in its condemnation of evil and the desire to cling to the cross, and just the image of like, "May you drink your own poison." That's so awesome. That's very,
Yeah.
very
Yeah,
powerful.
and I think this is one of the great things is if you wear this medal or have it on something, and you're feeling some temptation of any kind,
Hmm.
then it's a reminder that it is the the dragon, the devil who's working behind this, and to answer to him, you know, you can drink your own venom. Never persuade to me vain
Hmm.
things. And this I think is such a important thing in people's spiritual life to have present these sacred objects which help them in the small moral decisions of life. And of course, temptation normally comes to people in small forms to begin with.
Hmm.
But if we can consistently refuse those small forms, and whether it's just something like distraction, irritation, overindulgence, whatever, then we equip ourselves spiritually with the virtues to overcome the more serious temptations in life.
Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, I mean, it's just an important reminder. I mean, I have one on my rosary, and that's a good thing to have as a reminder. Um, my curiosity hearing that background story is, I mean, knowing a bit about the life of Saint Benedict and then knowing some of the origins of the medal. What's sort of the crossover? I mean, do we think this is a prayer that he wrote, or just
Yeah,
from the tradition of his rule,
no,
or?
uh, no. So this actually is something which I do talk about a bit
Mm-hmm.
in the book.
Mm-hmm.
We can actually trace or deduce fairly confidently when these verses came into existence, because of the type of rhyme and meter which is used, which changed over the course of time. So we can say, Benedict did not write these
Mm-hmm.
verses himself. Um, on the contrary, they probably originated in about the 11th or 12th century would be the accurate time to date them. And that's consistent with the discovery in 1647, where they had this medal in existence already for a couple of centuries at least. But it's not extremely ancient. So probably about the midway through the Middle Ages, about the year 1100, I would guess myself. Now, the fact is also that this medal wasn't used all throughout Europe. It wasn't something that was common to the Benedictines everywhere. It was used only in this one particular monastery in Germany,
Hmm.
the Abbey of Metten, which suggests that it originated in that area. So so that would be, I would be confident, the actual historically the origin of this medal.
Mm-hmm.
And then it spread quickly because at that time, when we're talking the mid 1600s, there was like a plague of witchcraft
Mm-hmm.
uh, affecting Europe and also parts of North America for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people imagine that the witchcraft campaigns against witchcraft that went on were just like a mindless type of persecution of
Mm-hmm.
persecuting innocent old ladies and things like that. But in fact, we know that it was something that was real, that was taking
Mm-hmm.
place. And I think part of the reason that it did become so strong in England and in Germany was because of the rise of Protestantism, which meant that a big part of the spiritual life of people was then forced underground.
Hmm.
People continued to venerate relics of saints, the rosary, and so forth, but it became an illegal type of thing. And
Hmm.
as soon as something is forced underground, it quickly becomes distorted. And I think that is where this great issue arose.
Hmm.
So the and of course this is something which is still in our world today. So to
Yeah.
protect ourselves against evil forces which are active, and
Hmm.
so this kind of some of the ways it does this are described in the book. So
Hmm.
I'll share some of these with you. Um, so I've included something from a book called Benedictus Redivivus, or St Benedict Revived, which was published in Latin in 1679 by a Benedictine monk, Father Gabriel Buccelet. And he says these are the demonstrated powers of the metals. It expels from human bodies any curses and compulsions induced by witchcraft and all such works of the devil. This is very important because, I think that a lot of people find themselves with compulsions, with addictions, with behaviors that they can't really explain and they don't seem to be able to overcome. And I think the only explanation for this is, in fact, forces of evil at work within
Hmm.
them and against
Hmm.
them. And this metal is a powerful antidote to such things. Now, in any place where the metal is located, it prevents any warlock, wizard, or witch from entering. So if it is
Oh wow.
prominently displayed, yeah. Um, so if you have one, I would say if you have one over your doorway and you
I was
find
gonna
a
say on the
person who
front door.
suddenly you can't get no, that's probably going a bit too literally, but whenever the metal is present, it provides relief and remedy for all souls who are affected by spells or
Hmm.
curses.
Hmm.
Then it also provides safety for all persons who are being vexed or attacked by demons or evil spirits of any kind. So,
Wow.
this is an experience a lot of people have, and of course, it's somewhat difficult to get an exorcism done by a priest. I mean, you
Hmm.
can't. It's not like something which is simple to go about. Um, but this um, is a good remedy. I won't say it's exactly as powerful as a full exorcism, but on the other hand, it does work against demonic forces. And the reason for that is because wherever there are objects of holiness and sanctity, um, evil spirits are naturally repelled.
Hmm.
And Saint Benedict, if we read, when we read his life, he had so many almost direct confrontations with the devil, who appeared to him in a variety of different guises, and he managed to overcome him in each case. And to to have the intercession and the power of Saint Benedict on your side is such a powerful tool.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's funny you said that this was kind of becoming popular originally because of the rise of witchcraft and sort of, in some ways, this reemergence of pagan ideas in Europe. That's kind of familiar sounding to what I think is happening today in a lot of places. There's an increasing interest, at least, I mean, I've seen just anecdotally in my country, in America, and even regionally in my area, an increase in witchcraft. We have a witch shop that opened in our town, actually. I mean, there's this emergence of interest in people who, I think growing up probably didn't have a firm religious upbringing of anything. So it's not even necessarily like they've left Catholicism or left Christianity in general. They might have never had a firm grounding in it. And certainly the number of baptized individuals has gone down and people are searching for something. And well, I think what's filled the void, at least I'm seeing more of it, is that an emergence of like a sort of neo-paganism, Wicca,
Well,
witchcraft. And so, I mean, the
yeah,
importance of this
that's
is growing.
it is indeed. And Drew, as you mentioned, like the emergence of all of these things, their increase in popularity, points out this emptiness in culture from actual devotion to Christ and the saints and so forth. And I often wonder about people when they're interested in these occult or New Age type of things. Why not just pray to God, or pray through one of the saints, or
Mm-hmm.
use the medal of St Benedict, or use rosary beads? These things are so much more spiritually powerful than
Mm-hmm.
crystals or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the difference between dealing with these very weak evil forces that people engage with, as opposed to dealing with the saints,
Mm-hmm.
with the angels, and so forth. And the saints and the angels they can help us, and they're on our side
Mm-hmm.
too. So it's much better to ask the assistance of the Blessed Virgin or one's guardian angel, because then you're asking the assistance of someone who is powerful and who is actually on your side. Whereas if you appeal to any other kind of spiritual force, you're really playing with fire and
Mm-hmm.
doing something which is, even if it might seem to work, is actually going to be to your harm.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah, you have no idea what you might be opening yourself up to and what you might be making a deal with, when you play with that type of stuff. In the book, it seems like there's a couple stories about the metal and its effects. I'm wondering, do you have any personal stories, or maybe people or anecdotally stories about the metal having positive spiritual effects or protecting people from spiritual darkness or anything like that you could share?
Yeah, I do. I've heard stories from people that as soon as when they get a St Benedict's medal and start wearing it, as soon as they do this, they feel an increase or an improvement in their mood. So one of the ways that the devil often attacks people is through lethargy and melancholy, or even depression, and this comes from no obvious reason. But to have this symbol of Saint Benedict, interest increases immediately a person's energy and confidence and faith in God and in themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
when it was counted back in the 1200s, they counted the number of Benedictine saints, and there were over 15,000 of them, almost
Wow.
16,000. I don't have a I don't know if anyone has actually published a full list, but we have a whole what we call the Acta Sanctorum, which is the life of all the saints. It's a huge collection, but there's also, before that came out, there is the Acta Sanctorum Ordinis Sancti Benedicti, the acts of the saints of the Benedictine
Hmm.
order, which is almost as big. So to
Wow.
have this medal actually recruits the intercession
Hmm.
of this enormous multitude of saints, and I think that is such a wonderful thing. I've also heard you mentioned about anecdotes where people have had this medal, and it has prevented what could have been you know quite terrible accidents
Oh, wow.
happening to them. Yeah, and they've come out unscathed because of
Hmm.
this. And I think it extends the protection of God to
Hmm.
everyone who has it. And of course,
Hmm.
that is augmented if the person actually knows what the things mean, because
Right.
it's then giving the not to say that if you don't know what it means. I mean, you could still have it. You could still wear it. You
Hmm.
don't necessarily have to memorize all of those verses, but it very much helps if you do,
Hmm.
because each time you see the medal, they'll come into your mind. And this is like a type of positive spiritual enforcement.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, just going back to what you said about the Benedictine order, it's certainly a formidable force. There's a meme I saw recently on the internet, and it was someone writing. I think it was someone writing God a letter saying, which religious order was the best, and then God wrote back, "I like them all the same." Signed, God, OSB. So that's kind of the joke. But I mean, there's no doubt with that many saints and that big of a legacy that the rule of St. Benedict and the life of St. Benedict is a monumental force in the
Yeah.
church. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
One thing I could imagine people watching this that maybe aren't well catechized, or maybe they're not Catholic at all, and they hear us talking about a medal, and the medal prevents accidents and causes things to happen. I could see on the outside, if you didn't have a proper understanding of sacramentals, that sounding superstitious, but that's not really what we believe is going on as Catholics. So maybe for someone who's kind of hearing this and going,
Yeah.
wait, that sounds like superstition, could you explain sort of the theology
Yeah.
behind how that works?
What the difference is. Okay, so you know, God's power is mediated through through physical objects in this world. And also mediated through things of the spirit, through prayer, thoughts, devotions, and so forth. Um, and if we believe that God is able to protect us and guide us, then sacramentals are basically physical things um, through which God's power works.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't work just independently of God,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. And so that's why it is not a superstition. So a superstition is basically when you take the spiritual side, the spiritual forces out of the equation. And you think, well, this medal or whatever it might be is the direct cause of this result. And, obviously, even the simple laws of physics and science shows that that cannot possibly be the
Mm-hmm.
case.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be something spiritually going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And for that reason, it is not a superstition. And most superstitions actually originated from things which were validly
Mm-hmm.
spiritual at one stage, and then people little by little forgot what the spiritual side
Mm-hmm.
was, and or they stopped believing in that spiritual side, but they kept the practice.
Right.
You know, um, so to give you an example, if someone made the sign of the cross and little by little they forget about what it actually meant, what it
Mm-hmm.
symbolized, and maybe they stopped believing in it. But then they still kept making the sign of the cross, thinking, well, when I
Right.
do this, this happens. At that point, it would become a superstition.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you got a St. Benedict's medal and you had no idea what it meant or who St. Benedict was or anything like that at all, and then you started, using it, then it would arguably be a superstition. Um, so yeah, but there is actually a grey area between valid spiritual practices and superstitions, and
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the great dangers of Protestantism, where they want to get rid of all things like that, little by little they actually get rid of the colour and substance of the faith itself
Mm-hmm.
until they're left with a purely philosophical concept of God
Mm-hmm.
or a purely ethical notion of devotion. They say, well, it doesn't matter if you don't have the mass, as long as you just go somewhere and pray. And then eventually, it doesn't really matter if you don't pray as long as you believe. And then, what is belief after all? And then eventually, the religion dissolves altogether. And
Mm-hmm.
and I firmly believe that scientific materialism is actually the final conclusion of Protestant thought because it's a systematic stripping away
Mm-hmm.
of the so-called unnecessaries of faith, of all that gives it its color and beauty. I think this is where the Catholic Church and the Orthodox churches, for that matter, as well.
Mm-hmm.
This is because we cling on to the importance of the material of the symbols, and God created this world for us
Mm-hmm.
to mediate His glory and power by means of things we can perceive, and to attempt to exclude those, I believe, is it's a very dangerous path.
Perfect. No, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think that was very well said. One of the things I was thinking about as you were sharing all of that is that, abuse of a thing does not negate proper use of a thing, right? Just because maybe some people in some place have done something wrong, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And that's kind of what Protestantism tends to do, is like, oh, well, maybe one person knew one person who used this incorrectly or was superstitious. That doesn't mean that we throw every medal out and we throw every devotion out and we throw out all of that, doctrine and all of the developmental traditions
Yeah,
that have made our faith so colored. I also was thinking about the Old Testament. There are all sorts of moments in the scriptures in the Old Testament where they set up monuments and they set up things to remember what God did in a particular place. And some of them are statues or rocks, and monoliths. And in the temple, for instance, there's even a statue on the Ark of the Covenant, so it's like the holiest place that there can be, and there's an image, right? So it's clearly not that these things in and of themselves are bad. It's that an abuse of them is bad, and even when Israel would start to
exactly,
abuse them, God wouldn't say, never do that again. He would say, just start using it
exactly.
correctly, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think in a lot of cases, this abuse is something which really doesn't exist at all. A
Right.
classic example would be what Protestants say. Worship of Mary. You're worshiping Mary,
Right.
not, but that never happens. You'll never find a single person who is devoted to the Blessed Virgin who doesn't also love Christ and believe
Right.
in God. You'll never find, I would say, a person with a St Benedict's medal who believes in it,
Mm-hmm.
who doesn't venerate St Benedict, and consequently who doesn't believe in the Catholic faith.
Mm-hmm.
That these things are imaginary; they don't really exist. One follows from the other. To value the St Benedict's medal, it follows logically that you value the mission, the spirituality, the sanctity of St Benedict, and
Mm-hmm.
from that, it obviously follows that you believe firmly in the faith of the church. You
Mm-hmm.
can't have one without the other, And I can't imagine like an atheist wearing a St Benedict's medal around. It
Yeah.
just
Well.
doesn't make sense. I don't believe you would find a single one. I might be wrong about
Mm-hmm.
that,
Or they
but
wouldn't be
I
atheists for
don't.
very long. Maybe if you start wearing it, maybe there would be the prayers of those Benedictines would eventually get them. But
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
that's right.
No, that's perfect. Yeah, I know a big portion of my audience is people who are kind of looking into Catholicism. I was a convert from Protestantism, and I know that's always like a lingering question in the Protestant mind is, how do we engage with these things properly? And I think you're exactly right. Usually what you find is, oh, there was never improper use. It was just a misunderstanding from people who were, quick to strip away and slow to understand maybe what they were stripping away, which is like a hallmark of our culture. And that's a reason we probably all need to be wearing these medals more, right? Because it's a good, strong pronouncement of our faith, a denouncement of evil, and
It is.
a proclamation of our values as Catholics, which is huge, and an opportunity to talk about it maybe too. I mean, has that happened?
It is.
I'm sure people
Yeah,
see it and go, "What is that?"
it is. It is. You have one of these things, and people are going to ask you, what does it mean? And
Mm-hmm.
it's an opportunity to share. And
Mm-hmm.
the evangelization is so important, but we can't just go up and approach people cold and start
Right.
telling them about well, I mean, you could, but it's probably not that productive. But if people ask and you answer, that is really the best way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And find it's also an important reminder to oneself, because we're called to convert the world, but we've also, in the meantime, got to keep reconverting ourselves. And to
Mm-hmm.
have this here as a reminder is, such a powerful thing. And this, you see the cross. A lot of the Benedictine medals now have a crucifix as well. Um, it's a huge reminder. You look at it, glance at it for a split second, and within that split second, you have a reminder of all of these things which are so important, of the great God who gave His only begotten Son for our salvation.
Mm. Amen. Amen. Well, Father Nixon, thank you so much for coming on to share with us about St. Benedict and this medal. I want everyone to just go look into this book and pick up a copy. It's really beautifully made. You can get it at Tan Books, and if you go over to Tan Books, you can actually use my discount code to get 15% off. And it's a pretty brief little book. It's not that intimidating to dive into. It's something you could read in a couple afternoons, and have a deeper understanding of these things. For people who want to learn more about your work and other books you've written or things that you're up to, Father, where can they go?
Well, you can go to the TED Books website. There's a bunch of books there which I've done for them, which is known as the Resurrection series. Also, you might be interested to visit our own monastery's website, Eudorcia, one word, .com.au. The AU is for Australia, of course. And we have a guest house here. We welcome a lot of visitors, so we're a fantastic place to visit. We're quite unique in Australia. We're the only monastery, we're the oldest religious community in Australia. We were founded
Oh,
back in
wow.
1846, and we're the only one founded by Spanish monks.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Yeah, and I'll be sure to put
Yeah.
all those links in the description too, so people can find your other books and go look into the monastery. Maybe come stay. And wow, that's really cool. Maybe I'll have to pop down there sometime. It's quite a flight, but that sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Well, again, Father, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of that with us. And everyone, make sure again you go check out this book. I'll have it linked in the description as well, so you can get to it easily. And if you enjoyed this and you thought it was valuable, make sure you share this episode with someone you think could benefit from it. And make sure you hit the like button, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.